Finally, the Japanese bridge. After we looked at both the garden and the house, the best part was still to come, the lily pond. To get there, we had to cross the garden and go through a tunnel under the main road. "Oh, look, Mr. Bloom," I cried, "there's the Japanese bridge." And when at last we were standing on the bridge, it was so thrilling that there were tears in my eyes. And in Mr. Bloom's, I'm sure I saw a few. "What was it I said?" said Mr. Bloom. "It was possible. That's right. And now we're really here," I said. "It could never be more now than right now. If we don't come back another time, that is," said Mr. Bloom. We looked down at all the water lilies, red, pink, and white. Another plant, a wisteria, grew on the bridge, and I took a leaf to press into my travel diary. "Look there where the bamboo is growing," said Mr. Bloom. There it was, the little green boat. It looked almost like the picture in the Mountain Museum. The Monet children used to go rowing in this pond. We saw some big fish swimming around the water. Mr. Bloom said that they were carp. They helped to keep the pond clean by eating the insects and the plants. Let's say that we can't look at the bridge again until we've gone around to the other side, I said. "Why?" asked Mr. Bloom. So we can get our own impression of the bridge, just like Monet, I said. But by the time we got to the other side, all my impressions were gone and forgotten. A bird had flown by, and a friendly man in a checkered jacket said hello, and we looked at the wheel that opens the floodgate, letting fresh water into the pond from the river Rue. Oh well, I guess I wouldn't make much of an impressionist, neither would Mr. Bloom. But Monet practiced capturing impressions. Every day he studied his bridge. He discovered that it looked different depending on the time of the day and the weather. It was sunlight that made the difference. Monet painted many pictures of the bridge, and none of them is the same as the others. He would take several canvases with him, painting a little on each one as the sun rose higher in the sky. People thought he was strange, painting the same bridge over and over again. When Monet was an old man, he got cataracts in his eyes and became almost blind. He kept on painting anyway, but his pictures were almost all red, and when he finally dared to let a doctor operate on his eyes, all the other colors returned to his paintings. So I'll show you close-ups. So this is one, and here's another one right here, where. And here's one that was when he had the cataracts in his eye. This one here, see how it's mostly red? I took out my sketchbook and I decided to draw just one water lily. I thought it would be too hard to draw the whole pond with the clouds reflected in the water at the same time as the seaweed that was swaying under the water. My water lily turned out all right, but I wasn't really satisfied with it. But then Monet was never really satisfied with his pictures either. Sometimes he was so dissatisfied that he would take a whole pile of his paintings and burn them out in the garden. So here's one of his water lily paintings. You can see the water lilies close up. And here's Linnea, Mr. Bloom. And this is a picture of Blanche helping Monet paint. This is Monet right here, this guy. And there's Blanche. Mr. Bloom told me that Monet bought the land where the lily pond is when he was 53 years old. 3 years earlier, he was able to afford the house. People had finally started to like his paintings and buy them. I took pictures of the pond from lots of different angles. Mr. Bloom was afraid that I would fall in when I was taking the water lily pictures. When Monet was old. Under an arch of climbing roses, we found the bench where Monet used to sit and look at his lily pond. Naturally, we went over and sat down, just as he used to do. Tell me about when Monet was old, I said. It was then that he got his great idea, said Mr. Bloom. He started to work on the biggest pictures he had ever painted. They would cover the walls of a big round room. No, maybe it would be 2 rooms. Monet had to build a whole new studio so he was able to have room for the pictures. He painted and painted for the last 10 years of his life. When the panels were covered with paint, he started to paint over parts of the pictures and make changes. As usual, he wasn't satisfied. Finally, his best friend told him to stop before he destroyed the paintings. That at that moment they were already masterpieces. Monet didn't think so, but he did stop making changes. Are the masterpieces still around? I asked Mr. Bloom. Can we see them? The water lily rooms are at the Orange Museum in Paris, said Mr. Bloom. That used to be the King's greenhouse, but now it's a museum. But the rooms have been closed for repairs for several years now. I hope they've opened them again. This is a picture of Monet sitting on the bench. This was taken the last summer of his life. The paintings were finished by then, but he didn't want to get rid of them. They were still hanging in his studio when he died. He lived to be 86 years old. Picnic by the River Rue. Mr. Bloom, we forgot something. Our lunch, said Mr. Bloom. And I'm starving, I said. This would be a good place for a picnic. Right here by Monet's bench. We went up to the pink house to get our picnic basket, but there we found out that picnicking in the garden was not allowed. People would just litter and make a mess, explained the lady. Well, then we'll find a good place outside of the garden, said Mr. Bloom. Not as good as by Monet's bench, I said, but we did find a good place by the River Rue, just where it flows into the garden. There we spread out all of our goodies. What a feast, said Mr. Bloom. Could it be any better than this? Yes, I sat on Monet's bench by the lily pond. As it turned out, the goat cheese wasn't all that bad, but the cow's milk cheese was much better. Mr. Bloom thought the exact opposite, which was lucky for me. The pâté and apple cider were good, too, especially with the long baguette. After lunch, I laid on my back in the grass and watched the clouds sailing by in the sky. Don't fall asleep now, said Mr. Bloom. Soon we have to call a taxi so we won't miss our train in Vernon. I slept all the way on the train back to Paris. I didn't even see a single bend of the river. Back at the hotel, I went right to bed without even waiting to see the old man and the dog. The masterpiece. Oops. The museum in Paris with the most impressionist paintings is called Jean de Prom. The paintings that used to be there were now being moved to the Musée d'Orsay. When we arrived at Jean de Prom, there was a big crowd in front of the entrance. We can't stand there and wait, I said to Mr. Bloom. That could take hours. Let's go see if the Masterpiece Museum is open, I said. The Orange was close by, just across the park. When we didn't see any arrows or signs pointing out the way to the Monet's water lilies, we got a little worried. Sorry, but the water lily rooms are closed for repairs, said the lady at the door. But they would be open again next month, and you are welcome to come back then. The thing is, Mr. Bloom explained, this little girl and I have come a long way to see the water lilies, and we have to go home the day after tomorrow. Can't you make an exception? Unfortunately not, said the lady. The rooms are closed to the public. And when she said that, Mr. Bloom looked so sad that I burst into tears. Oh dear, said the lady. Let me see if there's something that can be done. After a long time she returned and winked at us. "My boss has made an exception for you, sir, and for the young lady. Come along discreetly so none of the other visitors will notice." So that's how we ended up right in the middle of the masterpiece itself. In the middle of the masterpiece itself. Oh, I'm sorry. Imagine we had the water lilies all around us. Good thing that I started crying at the entrance.